Here's my chat with Jason Liu, creator of the Instructor Library, a super popular open source model agnostic SDK for streamlining structured data extraction with large language models. I interviewed him on an event of the AI Builders Club, a community for AI engineers that hosts monthly meetups in Berlin, Amsterdam, and Rotterdam. So without further ado, Jason, how does Instructor differ from, say, regular prompt engineering?
So what Instructor does differently is because we use these validation libraries, the same variables that you use to template out your prompt are also accessible by the Pydantic models. Pydantic allows you to have validations, right? And so for example, when you enter a password in and it tells you that you need to have like letters and numbers and an exclamation mark, it will tell you when that fails. And when it tells you that fails, you as the user can then retry and make a better password. And it's the same thing that's happening with Pydantic. It allows to give us better validations, but it can also be a lot more complicated, right? And now your validations can have access to all the template variables that you had sent to the language model. And so if I have, different words that I have to use, or maybe I have to verify whether or not the answer agrees with the context, you can build validators as part of the Pydantic model rather than having to think about like for loops and thinking about prompting paradigms. We mostly have to think about validation paradigms.
So you're kind of teaching the model to do better. But as far as I know, like we can do this like in a sort of like a static manner. Do you see in the foreseeable future a way that we can use like sort of like a probabilistic or maybe like an LLM that kind of judges the probability of success in the next retry call? So they decide to stop or continue itself.
That's something that maybe the outlines library can do. Maybe by inspecting the logit, you can have some better understanding of what is possible. But I think because most of the time we're working with these closed models, I think there's less likely of a chance that's going to be the case in the near future.
You can kind of see the Instructor Library and how to work on there. I mean, of course, there's a lot of people explaining to it, but it also kind of shows your journey as a developer, as a machine learning engineer. And then you have to make a move into something else, right? So what's happening there and what role did Instructor play in this journey? And where are you now?
Yeah, so in 2020, I basically had like a hand injury that prevented me from coding too much anymore. So I kind of just took like a year or two off of working. And when ChatGPT came out, it was the first time I felt like, okay, wow, I can not only write again because LLMs have worked a lot better and this good, speech to text. I can also code again because the language models are getting better and better at coding. So, using things like Cursor to build Instructor has been really straightforward. What I also noticed was there was a big hole in sort of people's understanding of information retrieval and ultimately building out better RAG applications. And since my background was in doing recommendations in search, I kind of naturally found myself doing a lot more consulting and helping other businesses improve their RAG. And using tools like Instructor is just sort of one step in making those systems better.
I mean, what type of, because you have been as a consultant, really having clients, I believe, a lot in corporate and larger companies. I mean, what are some of the use cases that they want to apply AI, and is that like on par with what you recommend them to do?
A lot of it ends up being RAG and data extraction, right? There's just tons of unstructured data out in the world, whether it's just call transcripts or emails or just, financial documents and research. And a lot of it in the beginning is going to be around, okay, can I just talk to my data? But very quickly, it will transition to, can I build better reports? And can this reporting help me make better decisions? And if I can make better decisions, can the language model just propose what are the next steps I should do immediately, right? So for example, in a sales context, it's one thing to say, let me just copy paste my sales transcript into, a cloud project. But it's another thing to say, oh, we noticed that you have a sales objection. Here is a piece of marketing content that could help you overcome that objection. And then it gets even more complex. Okay, here's how you should write the email using the marketing content to address this objection. And at some point you just say, sounds like I can address this. Do you want me to hit send? I think that's going to be coming in the next couple of months. But I think that the larger problem really is because there's so many more software engineers building AI systems. Whereas I think machine learning engineers are very comfortable with doing a lot of experimentation in search of how the technology can solve certain problems. I think with software engineers, most of the time they build a prototype and they don't really know how to improve these things. And so a lot of the consulting ends up being around helping them focus more on research rather than just a blind product development.
Only 2 days ago when that opening identity was right. I know it's not only in the game, but when I found it super interesting and wondering if you're already planning on releasing something on that, is the ability to fine tune models with vision. There must be so much training data around now in the community to train these vision models with this.
The biggest thing to sort of recognize when we use vision models is most of the vision data is trained off of image captioning data. So if I take a picture of what I see right now, like the language model can just say, oh, I see a laptop with a screen and, there are 2 screens. There's like a Notion page and 3 pictures. But once we start using our ability to fine tune these models, we can now, for example, build conversational agents that can ask you questions about what you see. You can then fine tune a model that says, oh, it sounds like you're giving a talk. How are you feeling about that talk? Right? It's a very different data set than the image captioning data set. I think the second thing that's going to be really valuable for a lot of folks is doing a lot more bounding box models. And in particular, sort of having better fine tunes around processing text information in sort of like PDFs and documents. I think those are the things that will be unlocked through a lot of vision fine tuning, because we've seen them in open models. We haven't seen something as powerful as vision be applied to some of these tasks.
So I want to give the audience, of course, some opportunity to ask questions. And okay, I got it. So yes. Hey, I'm Janai. I'm a big fan of the library experience, especially that you can be using Instructor. Also, I give shit notes on X. But I want to ask something that I felt you might have perspective on because it's time off. Like young AI developer, and I really love what I do, and I love to code in this world. But it's also happy that they're doing it's great outside. I wake up and I open my laptop and I think, what am I really doing? It's like so much like you're working on a very specific part of the tool that what they specifically have in the world. And so I was wondering when you or if you have those babies, what are your thoughts on that? And also, do you have, like, what is the thing that you like to do that is furthest away from technology?
Yeah. So I think 2 parts. One was a question of like, what do I do that's far from technology? Then the first one really is sort of like trying to see the bigger picture on these things, right? I think for example, for Instructor, what the code is doing is just, giving you some better ergonomics, right? But for me, my mission with Instructor really is the belief that one, I think many systems that are using it longer now are probably too complex. I think people deserve better. And so there's sort of like the mission of developers deserve a simpler developer experience than using language models. And I just think that we should be programming in this kind of way, right? And so the task that I'm doing is sort of pushing towards this vision I have of sort of how I think programming will look like in 2 or 3 years. When OpenAI does it, great. I feel a part of them is recognizing that this is the right design. And that's the thing that makes me feel good. And then in terms of what is far away from technology, on my 2 years off, I really just did a lot of like free diving, a lot of pottery and martial arts and stuff. That really helps sort of keep yourself in a beginner's mindset. But for me, all of it is just, the fun of learning and the fun of teaching.
Jason, so of course, I actually wanted to ask more about the whole consulting stuff work that you do, right? So I started an AI company around April, and a lot of people approach me saying, yeah, I'm a Gen AI expert consultant. I'm a very highly skeptical person. And I was like, yeah, no. Like, obviously, this stuff has been around for such little time. It's like, how are you actually going to convince me that you can position yourself as an expert? Here I am, 6 months later, wanting to position myself without saying it's like an expert. So, how can I actually, convincing me to do that? Because I do understand, even this 6 months time, the amount of knowledge, experience I've amassed is definitely worthwhile. But to get to my skepticism, I find it hard to convince others that Gen AI experts even exist.
Yeah. So I really don't think Gen AI experts exist. Like most of what I actually sell them is like the fact that, look, I've been managing human data labeling teams for a very long time and human teams that do data extraction. And now we're using it with language models. So I'm doing the same thing, but it's just going to be cheaper per dollar. I don't think about selling myself as doing RAG, but just thinking, well, recommendation systems have been something I'm working on for like 8 years. and where I'm going to be able to find those parallels. I think ultimately what has helped me in the process of being seen as the expert is my writing. And more specifically, there's kind of two kinds of writing. When you write for beginners, what you get is a lot of followers on Twitter, for example. But if you want to be seen as an expert, you have to sort of write two things. One, things that are a little bit too technical than for beginners. And then two, focus on the pain points of your customers. So if I write about content on how engineers should be changing the way they build products, or how I think about performance optimization, or when I think about writing about how we can build different product UX that collects feedback that allows me to fine tune an embedding model. That's the content that maybe gets like 1,000 readers, but 4 of them want to reach out and hire me because they're running into those problems, right? So it's less about how can I be an expert, but how can I communicate to everyone else? Like, I've at least solved your problem before. Like, even if you only have 6 months of experience, what that means is you can probably sell to anyone that has, 2 months of experience. And then the question you ask them is, how much is it worth to you to fast forward 4 months into the future? Right. Like, I'm not going to take you 2 years in the future, but even 4 months is a long time. No one wants to say, well, I didn't pay anything, but I spent 4 months Googling free shit on the internet. Like, that's usually how you get them. Right. And it's like, when their engineers read all my blog posts, they say, okay, well, I don't want them to be spending like an hours a week reading. I want them to be spending hours a week working. And then again, it's like, how much is that worth to you? How much is it worth to be just a little bit ahead? I'd really focus on just thinking about writing good content, but it's not just beginner content, but the documenting the pains and the struggles you've had to develop the expertise. Because if someone is 2 months behind, you say, don't make this mistake. This may cost me like $5,000. Maybe that's worth $1,000 to them.
Yeah, that's very fun. Appreciate it. Thanks. Are there any benefits of using Instructor EA with a GPT model that already outputs an structured data?
So the ways that structured output is done is just through constrained sampling, right? And so what we're doing is we're picking tokens that match some kind of shape. But I think there's a ton of different validations that are not defined by regular expressions. So for example, one of the validators that we use verifies, so it does this. It says, okay, given the answer that's in JSON, use a regular expression to find all the URLs that were included in this email. Then make sure, 1, the person I'm sending it to is authorized to view the URL. And 2, make sure all the URLs are under this domain name. That is something that cannot be done with structured outputs. But in production settings, there is like a 1% chance that the language model is like including a link that doesn't exist, or maybe is able to see a link that the user is not authorized to include. And in those situations, those semantically correct validations, those are the things that constrained sampling will ultimately never be able to represent well. Like, here's another example, which is for long meetings, I have a rule that says I want the summary to be at least 30% as long as the transcript. Basically, I just don't want to send in a 4-hour video of a math lecture and the summary to be, this professor is talking about math. I want some minimum compression. So my validator is assert that the length of the summary divided by the length of the transcript, which is greater than 0.3%. If this fails, throw an error message that says, please make this transcript longer. It should be at least 700 characters. Again, that's not really a regular expression that we could write to constrain the sampling to do that.
It's nice. So in a recent blog post on Instructor, and it was about like the sensitivity of models to the name value pairs, right? And so basically, if you define your projected schemas in Instructor, then you're kind of making this very long, very structured prompt, right? And we all know that prompting is super sensitive, like, and then but here you can really see, like, you change one word in the schema definition, and you can entirely get sense. I mean, and one I thought like, oh, that is great, and the other thing was like, I was like, oh my god, man, how am I ever going to handle these whole lot of schemas? How am I going to measure? How am I going to iterate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think ultimately the answer is just having good evaluation sets, right? Like that's a very funny example that we had when we were testing it with like GSM 8K, like the grid school math was if we asked the language model for the answer, it was like 92% correct. But if we asked the language model for the correct answer, it was 95% correct, right? So even like small words like that have sensitivity. What ends up being the most useful is two things. One, having the evaluations to know that you're bringing yourself to this kind of sensitivity. And two, making sure you have better few-shot examples. I think many people are not really investing enough time in actually just curating a few-shot example data set. Like I have a newsletter. I want to have good few-shot examples for this newsletter. I paid a writer like $3,000, right? Like that's how much those few-shot examples are worth. I think most people and most companies have sort of neglected the quality of the few shots.
Yeah. And would you say that when there's so much sensitivity to one key word spelling, then you kind of have to keep your calls very small because it's probably also depending on what comes from, right? Like if there's different models that make up the end call, then how ever I'm gonna validate it.
Yeah, well, it depends. So I would say keep your prompt big because it's just less technical debt. Like if you have small prompts, then you might be managing 6 different prompts, which is even more annoying than having a one long prompt. And again, really focusing on having evaluations. So instead of saying, okay, let me just like ask Jason what the right answer is, I should just run tests and just make sure that, 96 is higher than 92. I think that's half the time I spend consulting is going, okay, well, let's figure out if we can create 100 examples and verify if this is the thing that is worth doing. But I would honestly still start with a big prompt just because it's easier to manage these things. But ultimately, you're going to find that, maybe my prompt is doing a summary and doing action items of a transcript. And if I tell it to have a shorter summary, the action item will get shorter, right? The first step should be, count the number of action items, count the number of characters in the summary, and make sure that when I change the prompt, those things don't change. Those are simple unit tests that I can run to make sure that my system is behaving the way I want it to.
And do you link switch versus parenting logfire? Like any thoughts on that?
I'm an investor in Logfire, so I think it's like a different bias there. But for observability, I mostly use Logfire, and then for a lot of the LLM specific evals, the thing I've been using the most has been Brain Trust.
Awesome. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me.